Rania the Robber's Daughter, Chapter 4. Rania woke up early the next morning. Her father was already eating his porridge, but he was making slow progress. He would lift the spoon glumly to his mouth, but sometimes he forgot to open it. He wasn't getting much porridge down, and was no better when little Snip, who had been standing guard at Hell's Gap that night with Bumper and Shaggy, suddenly came rushing into the stone hall, shouting, "Borka is waiting for you, Matt. He's standing there on the other side of Hell's Gap and carrying on, and he wants to talk to you immediately." Then little Snip jumped hastily back, which was clever of him, because the next second the wooden platter with Matt's porridge on it flew past his ear and hit the wall, splashing porridge all over everything. "You'll clean up after yourself," Lovis reminded him sternly. But Matt was not listening to her. "So, Borka wants to talk to me. Death and destruction, so he shall. And after that he won't be doing much talking for quite a long time, if ever," said Matt, clenching his teeth till they squeaked. Now all the robbers were crowding into the room from their bedrooms, eager to know what was going on. "Swallow your porridge as if the place were on fire," said Matt, "because we're about to take a wild bull by the horns and throw him into Hell's Gap." Rania jumped into her clothes. It did not take long, because all she had to do was to pull a short full-skin tunic over her shift, with trousers to match. And she always went barefoot until the snow came, so no time had to be wasted on boots or slippers when she was in a hurry. If only everything had been as usual, she would soon have been out in the woods. But nothing was as usual any more, and she had to go up on the roof with them to see what was going to happen. Matt urged his robbers on, and, with their mouths still full of porridge, all of them marched determinedly up the stone steps of the fort to the roof. Only Noddle Pete stayed alone by his porridge platter, fretting bitterly because he could no longer join in when there was some fun in the offing. "Too many steps in this house," he muttered, "and too rickety legs, for that matter." It was a clear, cold morning. The first red glow of the sun lit the deep forests around Matt's fort. Rania could see it over the parapet. She would have liked to be down there in her own quiet green world, not here by Hell's Gap, where Matt's robbers and Borka robbers now stood arrayed, glaring at each other straight across the chasm that separated them. "I see. So that's what he looks like, the snake in the grass," she thought, when she saw Borka standing there, so bold and bare-faced in front of his robbers. But he was not as tall and as handsome as Matt. That was a good thing, she thought. He looked strong, though. There was no denying that. He might be short, but he was broad-shouldered and powerful, with tufts of red hair sticking out in all directions. Beside him stood someone else, with red hair, although it lay like a smooth copper helmet on his head. Yes, there was Burke, apparently enjoying the scene. He gave her a secret wave, just as though they were old friends. So that was what he thought, the thieving dog. "It's a good thing you came so uncommonly fast," said Borka. Matt gave his enemy a black look. "I would have come before," he said, "but there was something I had to finish first." "What sort of thing?" asked Borka civilly. "A poem I was making up early this morning. 'Lament for a dead Borka robber,' it's called. Undis might get a bit of comfort from it when she becomes a widow." Perhaps Borka had thought that Matt could be reasoned with, and that there would be no more quarreling about the matter of Borka's keep. But he had made a terrible mistake there, Borka realized now, and he began to get angry.
"You should be thinking more about comforting Levis, who has to put up with you and your big mouth all the time," he said.
Undis and Levis, the two in need of comfort, stood each on each other's side of Hell's Gap, arms folded, and looked each other straight in the eyes. They looked as if they could get on quite well without any comfort.
"Now you listen to me, Matt," said Borka. "There was no staying in Borka's wood any longer. Soldiers are swarming there like flies, and I had to take my wife and child and all my robbers somewhere." "Maybe so," said Matt, "but just stealing yourself a place to live, slap bang, without asking, is something no one with a sense of shame would do." "Strange talk from a robber," said Borka. "Haven't you always taken what you liked without asking?"
Said Matt. He had no answer to that, but Rania could not think why. She would have to find out what Matt had taken without asking.
"Talking of one thing and another," Matt said after a short silence, "it would be interesting to hear how you got in, because then we can throw you out the same way." "That's enough talk about throwing out," said Borka. "How we got in? Well, you see, we have a little monkey here who can climb the steepest walls with a long, strong rope like a tail behind him."
He patted Berk's red topknot, and Berk smiled.
"And then the little monkey tied the rope on good and tight up there, so we could all climb up after him. And after that, all we had to do was walk straight into the keep and start organizing ourselves a regular robber's den."
Matt ground his teeth for a time while he pondered this. Then he said,
"As far as I know, there is no entrance on the north side." "As far as you know. There's not much you know or remember about this fortress, although you've been living here all your life. You see, in the days when it was more of a gentleman's home than now, the maids had to have a little door where they could go out and feed the pigs. Surely you at least remember where the old pigsty used to be when you were a child, where you and I used to catch rats, until your father found us and boxed my ears so hard I thought my skull was going to burst." "Yes, my father did a good many things," said Matt. "He kept all the worker snakes in the grass in their place when he came across them." "Yes, indeed," said Borka. "And it was that bully who taught me that every member of Matt's clan was my enemy, alive or dead. Before that I had scarcely realized that we belonged to different clans, you and I don't think you realized it either." "But I do now," said Matt. "And now there will either be a lament for a dead worker robber, or else you and your rabble will leave Matt's fort by the way you came." "There may well be laments of one kind or another," said Borka. "But I've made a home in Borka's keep now, and here I stay." "We'll soon see how things turn out," said Matt, and all his robbers growled indignantly. They wanted to stretch their bows at once, but the Borka robbers were armed too, and a battle at Hell's Gap could only end badly for all of them, as both Matt and Borka realized. So they parted now, after abusing each other one last time as a matter of form. Matt did not look exactly like a conqueror when he returned to the stone hall, nor did any of his robbers. Noddle Pete surveyed them in silence, then smiled his sly, toothless smile. "That wild bull," he said, "the one you were going to take by the horns and heave into Hell's Gap. I suppose that was a crash that rumbled all around Matt's fort." "Eat your porridge, if you can chew it, and leave the wild bulls to me," said Matt. "I'll deal with them when the time comes."
But since, at the moment, the time did not seem to have come, Rania hurried back to her woods. The days were growing shorter now. The sun would set in a few hours, but until then she wanted to be in her forest and by her lake. There it lay in the sunshine, glowing like warmest gold. But Rania knew that the gold was deceptive and the water ice cold. All the same, she quickly took off her clothes and dove in. She let out a shriek at first, but then she laughed with pleasure and swam and dove until the cold drove her out. Her teeth chattering, she slipped her tunic on again, but it did not help. She would have to run to get warm. She ran like a troll between the trees and over boulders until the chill left her body and her cheeks were glowing. After that she went on running just to feel how easy it was. Shouting with joy, she came shooting out between a couple of close-growing firs and ran straight into Berk. Then rage welled up in her again. She could no longer have any peace, even in the forest. "Look where you're going, robber's daughter," said Berk. "Are you really in that much of a hurry?" "What kind of hurry I'm in has nothing to do with you," she snapped, and she ran on. But then she slowed down. It had occurred to her that she could steal back and see what Berk was doing in her woods. He was squatting outside the den where her fox family lived. That annoyed her even more, because, after all, they were her foxes. She had been following them ever since the cubs had been born that spring. Now the cubs were big, but still playful. They leaped and bit and fought each other outside the den, while Berk sat and watched them. His back was toward her, but in some strange way he knew that she was behind him, and he called out without turning, "What do you want, robber's daughter?" "I want you to leave my fox cubs alone and get out of my woods." Then he got up and came toward her. "Your fox cubs, your woods. Fox cubs belong to themselves, don't you know that? And they live in the foxes' woods, which is the wolves and the bears and the elks and the wild horses' wood too, and the owls and the buzzards and the wood pigeons and the hawks and the cuckoo's wood, and the snails and the spiders and the ants' wood." "I know all the living things in these woods," said Ronia, "so don't you think that you have to teach me anything." "Then you know that it's also the wild harpies and the gray dwarfs and the rumphobs and the merk trolls' wood." "Tell me something I don't know," said Rania. "Something I don't know any better than you. Otherwise, shut up. In any case, it's my wood." "And your wood, robber's daughter. Yes, your wood too. But if you want it for yourself alone, then you're sillier than I thought when I first saw you." He glared at her, his blue eyes dark with resentment. He did not think much of her, she could see, and it pleased her. He could think what he liked. She wanted to go home now and not have to see him any more. "I'm happy to share the woods with the foxes and the owls and spiders, but not with you," she said, and went. Then she saw the mist coming over the forest. It rose thick and gray from the ground and rolled in among the trees. A moment later the sun had vanished, and the golden gleam had gone. Now you could see neither stick nor stone. But she was not afraid. She could feel her way back to Matt's fort, even through the thickest fog, and she would certainly be home before Lovis sang the wolf song. But what about Berk? Perhaps he knew all the paths and tracks in Borka's wood, but here in Matt's wood he was not so much at home. Well, then, he could stay there with the foxes, she thought, until a new day dawned without mist. Then she heard him calling out of the thickening haze, "Rania!" There, now he knew her name, too. Now she was no longer just a robber's daughter. Once again he called, "Rania!" "What do you want?" she shouted, but he had already caught up with her. "This mist scares me a little," he said. see. You're frightened of not getting home to your thieving people. Then you'd better share the fox's lair with them, since you're so fond of sharing." Berk laughed. "You're harder than stone, robber's daughter. But you can find your way to Matt's fort better than I can. May I hold on to the edge of your tunic until we're out of the woods?" "That you can't," said Rania. But she untied her leather rope, the one that had saved him once before, and she handed him one end. "Here, but you'd better keep a rope's length away from me. I'm warning you." "As you like, cross robber's daughter," said Berk. And so their journey began. The fog closed in on them, and they walked in silence, a rope's length apart, as Rania had decreed. They must not leave the path now. Any wrong step could lead them astray in the fog, Rania knew. But she was not afraid. She felt her way forward with hands and feet. Stones, trees, and bushes were her signposts. They moved slowly, but she would still be home before Lovis sang the wolf song. There was no need for her to be frightened. But she had never made as strange a journey. It was as if all the living things in the woods had fallen silent and died, and it made her feel uneasy. Were these her woods, the woods she knew and loved? Why were they so silent and menacing now? And what was that hiding in the mist? There was something there, something unknown and dangerous, she did not know what, and that scared her. "I'll be home soon," she thought to console herself. "Soon I'll be lying in my bed, listening to Lovis sing the wolf song." But it was no use. The fear rose in her, and she was more frightened than she had ever been before in her life. She called to Berk, but her voice was the merest squeak. It sounded so awful that it frightened her still more. "I'm going to lose my wits this way," she thought. "It will be the end of me." Then, from deep in the thickest mist, there came soft, sweetly plaintive notes. A song, and it was the most wonderful song. She had never heard anything like it. Oh, how lovely it was! How it filled her forest with its beauty, and it took away all her fear. It comforted her. She stood still and let herself be comforted. How beautiful it was, and how the song charmed and enticed her. Yes, she could feel that those who sang it wanted her to leave the path and follow the enchanting music into the darkness. The song grew louder. It made her heart shake, and all of a sudden she had forgotten the wolf's song awaiting her there at home. She had forgotten everything. All she wanted was to go to those who were calling her from the mist. "Yes, I'm coming," she cried, and took a few steps off the path. But then came a tug on the leather rope so fierce that she fell headlong. "Where are you going?" cried Berk. "If you let yourself be tempted away by the unearthly ones, you are lost. You know that." The unearthly ones! She had heard about them. She knew that they came up into the woods from their dark places underground only when the fog closed in. She had never met any of their people, but she wanted to follow them now wherever they went. She wanted to live with their songs, even if it meant spending the rest of her life underground. "Yes, I'm coming," she called again and tried to go, but Berk was there now, holding her fast. "Let me go!" she shouted, striking out wildly, but he held her fast. "Don't upset yourself," he said, but she could not hear him because of the song. It was so strong now, filling the whole forest with its resonance, and herself with a longing that was impossible to resist. "Yes, I'm coming," she called for a third time, and she struggled to free herself from Berk. She hit and scratched and screamed and cried and bit his cheek hard.
but he held her fast. He held her fast for a long time, and suddenly the fog lifted as swiftly as it had come. At that same moment the song died. Rania looked around her as if newly awakened from a dream. She saw the path that led home, and the red sun sinking behind the wooden ridges. And Burke. He was standing there, right beside her. "A rope slink away," I said, she reminded him. Then she saw his bloody cheek, and asked, "Did the fox bite you?" Burke did not answer. He rolled up the leather rope and gave it back to her. "Thank you. I can find my own way home to Borka's keep now." Ronia peeped at him under her bangs. It was suddenly difficult to think really badly of him. She did not know why. "Be gone, then," she said kindly, and off she ran.